The war with Iran is driving energy costs to levels not seen in years, and that surge is now rippling through global air travel. Several U.S. budget airlines are asking the federal government for a $2.5 billion lifeline, warning that soaring jet fuel prices are putting pressure on their business models and threatening thousands of jobs, along with the affordable fares that millions of travelers depend on. The appeal comes as Spirit Airlines faces a potential bankruptcy and is negotiating separately for a $500 million government bailout, one that could leave the Trump administration with a significant ownership stake. We're joined now by David Shepardson, aviation, transportation, and technology correspondent at Reuters. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Jeff.
So as we mentioned, these low-cost carriers are asking for $2.5 billion, a bailout. What does that really signal about the health of the sector? Is this just about the cost of fuel, or is this an issue about the deeper business model, deeper problems?
I really do think it's about the fuel, right? So as you mentioned, jet fuel prices have doubled. Everybody is suffering, not just the budget guys, but the mainline carriers, American, Delta, United, Southwest. They're all struggling. They're all being forced to raise prices, raise baggage fees, and deal with this. But the budget guys are in a tougher spot, in part because they've got less room to raise prices. Their consumers are much more price sensitive, so it's harder to raise fares and keep those planes filled. And they're also asking Congress to waive the fuel taxes, the surcharge that you pay on your airline ticket. So between that and the $2.5 billion, it's a big ask. And right now, it doesn't appear Congress, the administration, are going to do it now. But depending how long these fuel prices go on, if we see some of these budget guys get in trouble or file for bankruptcy, then I do think Congress might take a more realistic look.
How unusual is a request like this? The airlines got a $25 billion bailout back in 2020. Of course, it was a once-in-a-generation pandemic. We hope once-in-a-generation. I mean, how does this compare?
So I do think the rationale is somewhat similar, although you're right, the COVID pandemic was much different, right? Because demand fell 90% overnight, and they actually got 3 rounds of bailouts, and they got $54 billion in funding in 2020, 2021. So the structure that the budget guys are talking about is similar in that the government would get warrants in exchange for that money that they could exchange for stock. Because remember, in the COVID bailout, those warrants were basically worthless on the day that they gave them the bailouts, and then the government got the appreciation. So the government only got $500–600 million in exchange for a very large bailout. So I do think it's similar. Obviously, things are not nearly as bad, but it really depends how long this goes on.
And Spirit Airlines is asking for a $500 million lifeline. If that funding falls through, what options remain?
Really, it doesn't look like much. I mean, if you listen to Spirit and their lawyers, they're basically facing liquidation. So they do have some money on hand, but they're restricted from using it. They're in negotiations with their creditors and the government to try to reach a deal. It was supposed to be done by today. The talks are continuing. And Spirit has really struggled. So since 2019, they haven't made a profit. They filed for bankruptcy twice in the last 2 years. And they made some mistakes. They made a big expansion bet before COVID. It didn't pay off. And a lot of the market has moved toward the premium segment, right? People want the fancier seats, the United, American, Deltas of the world. And so Spirit has struggled to keep those seats filled. And that business plan they have depends on much cheaper fuel. And the question is, how can they exit bankruptcy with a plan to survive with much higher fuel prices?
Why should we care if Spirit collapses? To your point, they've been struggling for 7 years. Right. If they can't get it together, it's just the free market at play.
No, you hear that argument for a lot of people on both sides of the aisle. However, even if you don't fly Spirit, you do benefit if you're a flyer. They're about 5% of the market, and studies show that the markets where Spirit competes with a Delta or American, those fares are lower. And we've seen certainly in the past that when budget carriers go out of business or stop flying, the legacy carriers can raise prices. So they do act as a downward pressure on airfares. And also, if you're a college kid or you just can't afford to travel, I mean, Spirit, Frontier, the smaller guys, they do provide airline travel options for people who really can't afford to fly the mainline carriers.
Well, what is the bigger picture for the major airlines? Because as you point out, first class seats are really driving profits at airlines like Delta and United.
Sure. And credit cards, too, right? Between the credit cards and that's billions of dollars in profits. Now, there's still a big demand. They're all trying to fill those other seats, and that's why you see the other airlines have these basic economy, no-frills fares, because they're trying to compete with the Spirits and the Frontiers of the world to have a lower-cost fare, but they're really trying to upsell you to all the fancier seats and the premium food or whatever they have, in the front of the cabin. So But the Spirits of the world, right, they just don't have that. They don't have the run room to like raise the prices because, their consumer base, if you raise prices $20, $50, $75, they're much less likely to stick with that airfare. And also they're less likely to be business travelers because they have fewer options and with fewer flights. If your flight gets canceled, you might get stuck for a day on a small carrier, unlike the bigger guys with lots more flights.
And let's leave our viewers with some news they can use. If they have summer travel plans, now's the time to buy their tickets.
Yeah, it sounds like a salesman, but you really should buy, right? The airlines all say they've only been able to pass on 30 to 40% of the higher cost of fuel. As the year goes on, they plan to increase that. United wants to do all of it. So really my advice is look for airfares now because prices are only going to go up, assuming the war and these high prices continue for months to come. So don't wait. Get your airfares now before it's too late.
Okay, David Shepardson of Reuters. Always good to speak with you. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Jeff.